Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cosmic Connection. This is the place where we explore the beauty and order of the cosmos and your connection to it all. My name is Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub. I am here with...
I'm Rick Levine, Rick Merlin Levine. And it's always a pleasure to be here with you, Amanda.
Absolutely, you too. And today we're going to be doing the December forecast. Before we dive in, I just wanted to make sure you all knew that you are invited to our free 2021 forecast panel, which is happening next week.
That means I get a week off.
Yes. Well, yes, you do, because it's happening at the same time as this show. So make sure you sign up for that. It's astrologyhub.com/2021. You're going to be hearing from 12 different astrologers, their take on 2021. What are the most important transits? What's the theme of the year? What can we do to prepare for it? What kind of things are we going to be working through? All those good things. And it's going to be in a panel discussion, which is always so much fun to see the dynamic between the astrologers. So it's totally free. That's happening next week, astrologyhub.com/2021. And Rick, I know that we're going to be going into this, that December, the main event is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! We've been waiting for this all year long, which some astrologers are saying is the official heralding of the age of Aquarius. And I would love to hear your take on that. Agree or disagree? Why or why not?
Well, it's not something I would agree with or disagree with. It's just something that's incorrect.
Okay. All right. Why do you say that?
Which is a little bit stronger than I disagree, because you disagree with an opinion, and there are some things that are not opinions, and yet I'll give you my logic and my reasoning that I think that a lot of people are missing, and yet I would surround it with the idea that when we're talking about ages that are centuries and centuries long, the key becomes, what's the starting point? You know, it's easy to know when you reach a line at 30 degrees of a sign, if you know that the sign started at 0 degrees. And this thing about ages, basically there are 12 ages in one full precession cycle. And this is a really simple thing that people just don't get because it seems complicated. And anyone who has ever spun a top knows that when the top begins to slow down, it wobbles until it tilts over. Well, it turns out that if you ever spin a top and look at it, you'll notice that if the top is spinning this way, the wobble is the other way. It wobbles backwards to the direction of the spin. And the Earth, just like a top, wobbles backwards to the direction of its spin. Its spin creates the daily cycle. The rotation is the 24-hour-a-day spin. So that the Earth spins about 365 and a quarter times one trip around the sun. But in that one trip around the sun, the Earth's wobbles backwards by 1/72nd of a degree. Now, astrologers have known about this since the time of the Greeks, because what that means is that this backwards wobble occurs at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years, 1/72nd of a degree a year. So in 72 years, it wobbles backwards it wobbles backwards. Wait a minute. It wobbles backwards 1 degree every 72 years. I said I was going to make it simple, and then I got lost in my thinking because I was looking for my calculator, which I just had here in front of me a moment. Oh, there it is, because I wanted to actually display how simple this math is, as I made it sound more complicated than it was. So if the Earth is wobbling backwards 1 degree every 72 years, that means, because there's 365, there's 360 degrees in one complete circle, 360 times, I'm going to just do this here and show you. Okay, 360 times 72 degrees turns out to be 25,920 years.
Mhm.
That's how many years it takes the Earth to make one complete wobble backwards. And we'll get to why the backwards part is important. Now, if I divide that by 12, that comes up to
2,160.
2,160, which is how many years there are in an age, which is 1/12 of the complete cycle. And we give the ages the names of the signs of the zodiac because the signs of the zodiac are all 1/12 of, the complete cycle. And the names that we give it actually are related because as the Earth is wobbling backwards, what that means is that every 72 years, if we measure the star that's appearing over the horizon at the beginning of the spring equinox, every 72 years, it'll be different by 1 degree. This is called the precession, the backwards movement of the signs of the zodiac. The precession of the equinox means at the equinox, the stars all proceed one after another backwards. What that means is that if we have been for approximately 2,000 years, as most astrologers would agree, in the age of Pisces, because it goes backwards, the next age is the age of Aquarius. And if we go prior to the age of Pisces, the age prior to that would be the age of Aries, because they're going backwards. The one prior to that would be the age of Taurus. Prior to that would be the age of Gemini. The age of Gemini, those 2,000-year period of time, was the beginning of the rise of the alphabet. What a surprise. The beginning of agriculture and planting of seeds. At the age of Taurus, this is the beginnings of the Vedic tradition. And at the age of Taurus, you would expect we would spend 2,000 years worshiping the sacred cow. Duh. You can't make this stuff up this good. Even in that ridiculous but telling scene in the movie The Ten Commandments, you have the Egyptians all dancing around this kind of bacchanalian kind of thing around this large golden calf. This was a symbol of the age of Taurus, where there was a worshiping of the sensuality and the presence of the cow or of the golden calf. And of course, that movie was done to make them look ridiculous, which was not the case, in reality. But then at the transition of the age of Taurus to the age of Aries, then we have a shift in the dynamics. And rather than worshiping a cow, we began to worship a ram. And this is, interestingly enough, this is the heralding the beginning of the Jewish religion around 1800, 2000 BC. And of course, that religion was the first of the monotheistic religions. Aries. There is nothing else with Aries other than me. God is an extension of me and I of God. And, and there is only one thing. And of course, in Judaism, the Paschal lamb is an important piece, and the whole idea of the Passover, which was all related to the spring and the god of Mars, who is an angry god, a god of war even. And maybe even most importantly, every year on the Jewish New Year's, the part of the ceremony is blowing the ram's horn. And they blow that, and it's but it's using the ram's horn as a way of heralding in the year every single year. And then with the shift of the age of Pisces, we have the relationship between the fish and Christianity. We have this idea of multiplicity. We have this idea that the symbol of Pisces being the two fish swimming in opposite directions, which can represent good and evil, or male and female, or evolution and involution, whatever opposites you want to take, black and white, I don't care. But whatever opposites you take, in the age of Pisces, those opposites are apparent, and yet there's this golden thread that's the horizontal line that is the mystical connection between the opposite forces in nature that's reserved only for the initiates, only for the priests. This is why in Catholicism, you couldn't talk to God. You had to go to a priest as an intermediary because they were the ones that had that golden thread connecting the two opposite forces. Well, as we move into the age of Aquarius, that disappears and we all become part of a net of equality. And there's a lot of wonderful literature about the age of Aquarius and this being a golden age where humanity is all has to do with equality rather than hierarchy and all this wonderful thing. But like everything, there's a dark side. There was a dark side, to the age of Pisces, and a dark side to the age of Aries, and so on. And we forget that when we go into the age of Aquarius, this is kind of like hive mind. This is like, there's this sense of newfound individuality, and yet anyone who's watched the early Star Trek knows Borg as this intelligent insect consciousness. When you say, "Who are you?" the person responds, "We are Borg," because there is no separate identity. And this is the shadow side of the age of Aquarius, where we become part of a social structure that's like a hill of termites, that's absolutely magnificent in its Unitarian, I don't mean that from a religious point of view, in its Unitarian consciousness, and yet every termite is part of this larger network of things. So this was just a description of what the ages actually mean, and the fact that we are in the age of Pisces. When you really dig down into the metaphor, which I only touched the tip of the top of the surface, becomes pretty obvious. So one might assume that the beginning of the age of Pisces probably was sometime around the birth of Jesus, because that was the origins of the age of Christianity. And even we call this, the dating system, the calendar that we use, the calendar is marking time from the beginning of this age. And of course it's off about 7 years, because in around I think maybe the 4th or 5th century, the Pope had this monk named Dionysius Exiguus. He gave him the job of figuring out when the birth of Jesus was. And it turns out that this guy was a bit of an idiot, and he didn't realize that because there were no zeros in Roman numerals, he missed the year 0. And on top of that, he didn't realize that Augustus and Octavius ruled, at different times, but they were the same person. So he added another 4 years. But it turns out that Jesus was most likely born in 7 BC at a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which is like what we have coming up now. And we'll reserve the deeper story about that and its relationship to the Christmas star until we get closer to Christmas. But here's the punchline. If you understand the concept of ages, and if you assume that the age of Pisces began somewhere around the time of the birth of Jesus, let's, for the sake of argument, say it began at his birth, 7 BC. What that means is that the age of Aquarius will begin 2,160 years after his birth, which is the year 2153, which by my reckonings is still about 130 years away. Now, the age may have begun a generation earlier with John the Baptist, or a generation later with this crucifixion, or who knows what. But there's something about that period of time historically that had some real power that seems to be the beginning or the turning of the ages. And so when I hear astrologers say that the age of Aquarius began in February of 1962, when there was a 5-6 and for a brief time a 7-planet alignment of planets in Aquarius, or that the conjunctions of 1993-94 with a cluster in Aquarius, or now this grand mutation cycle, or this grand mutation on the grand conjunction cycle of Jupiter and Saturn, which we'll get back to in just a moment. Because that's in Aquarius, people are saying this is obviously the beginning of the Age of Aquarius. There are people who are saying, no, the Age of Aquarius won't begin until Pluto moves into Aquarius in 2025, 2024, 2025. And I am here to remind everyone that ages have nothing to do with planetary movement through the signs. There may be resonance. There may be harmonic glimpses at what this will mean. I'm not saying that these are not important in the larger scheme of things, but an age is very specifically related to the precession of the equinox. And you can't say that this grouping of planets, I mean, I looked ahead and, there's a grouping of planets in 2163, where there is a Saturn, a Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus. Pluto's not involved. Conjunction or cluster in Aquarius, not unlike the one we had in Capricorn last year. And that's around the beginning of the Age of Aquarius. But is that the herald of the Age of Aquarius? Is that the signature? No, it's just another resonance. Anyhow, I'm done. That's my short answer to the question. The movement of Jupiter and Saturn and its conjunction cycle through the signs do not herald, do not indicate, do not mean that we are entering the Age of Aquarius. But it is the biggest event of this month. And it's not necessarily the biggest event of the year 2020, but it's the grand finale. It is the exclamation point after a Proustian long, I don't know if anyone's ever read Marcel Proust, but he wrote sentences that were paragraphs long. And it's like we have been in a sentence that began in January of 2020 that is like an incredibly long run-on sentence of these one after another major astrological events that end in this event, which would stand on its own in any other year as a really powerful event, but it's just the final punctuation mark on a pretty intense, crazy, and transitional year.
Okay, quick question before we go into all the astrology of December. With all that said about this not being the official transition into the Age of Aquarius, would you still say that we're moving into an Aquarian flavored time? Meaning, does the planetary placements indicate that Aquarius is still a significant sign for us to be paying attention to and understanding and working with?
Under direct interrogation and duress, I would say yes.
Okay. Well, you are under direct interrogation right now.
I would say yes with one condition. And that is that you then don't take that to the next step. So we are moving into the Age of Aquarius.
Right.
Well,
okay.
We are. And look, when you have an aspect in a chart, you can begin to feel it days, weeks, months, years before it occurs, depending upon the speed of the planet and the nature of the aspect. By the same token, I'm not suggesting that the cluster in 1962 or in the early 90s, or that this mutation, and we'll come back to what that means in just a moment, that this mutation in the grand conjunction cycle, I'm not suggesting that these are not important markers, and I'm not suggesting all these negatives, double, triple negatives. What I am suggesting is that these markers are, in fact, pointers toward this Aquarian energy that we seem to be moving closer and closer to, but we're not there.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. So let's talk about December. The grand finale.
An eclipse, planets changing signs. We have Mars moving direct, making only one traditional aspect all month. And that aspect that Mars is making is a square with Pluto. And that's the third square. Remember, when Mars went direct and retrograde and direct this year. It turned retrograde back at the end of June. And Mars has been moving back over these squares to these Capricorn planets. And I think I remember saying on this show probably 3 or 4 months ago that the important thing to understand, this was during the time, I think it might have been October, I'm not remembering exactly, when it was earlier than that, it was September, when retrograde Mars was backing over its square to Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter. And I said, what's interesting is that when it makes the last direct squares, that the planets will be in a different order, that Pluto will be first, which it is now, because the third and final Jupiter-Pluto conjunction has occurred. So the order has changed from Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto at the beginning of the year to Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn after the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, to now it's Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn. But by the time Mars makes the squares in January, that conjunction will have already occurred between Jupiter and Saturn. So it will end up being Pluto, Saturn, then Jupiter. And this is what December is about, because Mars is already back in the picture, kicking up the storm, making it square to Pluto. And that's on December 23rd. So we're looking at Christmas Eve Eve. Is that a new holiday? Christmas Eve Eve.
It is now.
But the thing is that that's right in a mix of events. And those events are very, very profound, that actually, I guess, began with the lunar eclipse last week, but really technically begin with the solar eclipse. And that eclipse that we're coming up to is on December 14th at 23 degrees of Sagittarius. And I know there will be people in the inner circle, that will be talking a lot more about that. I don't need to drill down too far on that eclipse, except these two eclipses are basically both setting up, because they're in so close proximity, they're setting up what happens over the next week and a half. And what happens, the eclipse itself is on the 14th. And during the eclipse, Mercury is trining Mars. And remember, Mars is playing an important role in all of this, because Mars will be making these final squares with these Capricorn planets. But the weird thing is that as Mars makes the final square with the Capricorn planets, 2 of them will be in Aquarius. And we'll come back to why that's so important, and why that will lead people to say, oh yeah, well, that's because we're moving into the age of Aquarius. We're not. Okay. But it is setting up this whole scenario that will be with us for the next year or so, because in ancient astrology, Capricorn is at home in Capricorn. Saturn is at home in Capricorn. And in ancient astrology, Saturn is at home in Aquarius. In modern astrology, Uranus is at home in Aquarius. So when Saturn moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, it begins to pick up on a square with Uranus, the other ruler, the modern ruler of Aquarius. And this is in play all through 2021 and even through September of 2022, where these ongoing squares and then near squares in September of 2022 between Saturn in Aquarius, representing the tradition, the status quo, the old, the structures, but it's in Aquarius, we're getting glimpses of the new, while Uranus in Taurus is the revolutionary, is the future seer, is the disruptor. But in Taurus, it wants to be practical, and it doesn't want to do anything that's just too abrupt. And so we're going to get this dance between the old and the new all next year, which is being set up by this movement from planets from Capricorn into Aquarius. I'm going to have to be really careful on my monthly for YouTube that I do every month. In my December forecast, as I was talking about some of this, I kept mixing up Capricorn and Aquarius, and no, it's not age related. I do that sometimes. It's just like my brain goes somewhere else. The movement of these planets, in particular, Jupiter and Saturn, from Capricorn to Aquarius, is what's mostly significant about December, and that they happen so close to the eclipse. On the day of the eclipse, they are both Jupiter and Saturn are in the last degree of Capricorn. Well, Saturn is moving slower, and Saturn is at 29.5 plus. Jupiter, which is moving a little quicker, is actually at 28 and almost like a few minutes away from being in the last degree. But what that means is the eclipse is on December 14th. What that means is that on December 16th, just 2 days after the eclipse, Saturn moves into Aquarius. And although it moved into Aquarius for a couple months earlier this year, it really just tested the waters and then moved back for remedial Capricorn work. Now, when Saturn moves into Aquarius on the 16th of December, it'll stay there for about 2.5 years, but it won't return to Aquarius for another 30 years, for another 29 years. It won't return to Capricorn for another 26, 27 years. And so this is definitely a shifting in the zeitgeist. But right behind it, just 2 days, 3 days later, early in the day on December 19th, Jupiter, moving faster than Saturn, moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, and Jupiter's really picked up speed now. Jupiter's moving quickly. Jupiter moves through the rest of Aquarius and on into Pisces relatively quickly. It's almost like Jupiter barely stays in Aquarius. But because Jupiter's moving faster than Saturn, and Jupiter behind Saturn moves into Aquarius on the 19th, on the 21st, which is the first day of winter, which is a cardinal point in the world of astrology, the 4 season starting points, the equinoxes and the solstices are cardinal points. I did a little digging on the word cardinal because I thought I knew, and I kind of did. But the word cardinal comes from a Latin word cardo, which means hinge. And a hinge is actually something that holds its place while things are turning around it. And the cardinals in Roman, in the church, the cardinals were meant to hold a place that was not going to move while things were shifting. And in fact, it was the red costumes of the cardinals that gave the bird, the cardinals, its name. So the cardinal points in astrology are important because they are placeholders that everything turns around. And astrologers often look to the charts of the cardinal moments of the time at which the sun moves into Aries at the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, Cancer, the solstice, Libra, the next equinox, and this one coming up, Capricorn, which is the summer solstice in the southern hemisphere, but the winter solstice up here. This particular chart of the solstice has in it the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction because it occurs on the day of the solstice. It actually occurs, the exact conjunction is applying. It occurs 8 hours after the solstice itself. That's how close it is. And this is extremely important. It would be extremely important in any sign, but because this year has been such a whirlpool, stagnation, vicious cycle, Groundhog Day of Capricorn energy, not willing to let us go to what's next. Again, we replayed the energy from different directions, and it's almost like as this conjunction occurs in the next sign, there's something that goes next. And that is huge. And that is is absolutely significant. And it's significant for many reasons, not just the fact that it's occurring in the next sign. And another reason why this conjunction is so significant is that we have to go back to Johannes Kepler. When we talk about the Christmas star in a couple of weeks, he'll come back into the picture, because before Johannes Kepler, you could be an astrologer, but you had no way of calculating where a planet was 600 years ago, because the accuracy of the formulas just didn't work. And with Kepler's formulas, all of a sudden you had formulas that were accurate enough that NASA could land a rocket, on an asteroid after traveling 1 billion miles. And so Kepler, being the crazy mathematician that he basically did these calculations for Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions, and he realized that every 20 years when this conjunction occurs, it occurs roughly, well, it varies, but it's a few degrees prior to where it occurred the time before, but 120 degrees away. What that means, 120 degrees, astrologers will recognize as a trine. Trines are elemental. What this means is that for long periods of time, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction would occur in one element, let's say Earth, and it would occur in, let's say, Capricorn. And then 20 years later, it would occur in Virgo. And then 20 years later, it would occur in Taurus. And then 20 years later, it would occur in Capricorn again, and 20 years, and so on. But each time it was reversing backward a little bit around the cycle. And Kepler calculated that it would take 800 years for the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction to reoccur in the sky in the same place as it was before. 800 years. Now, there's a lot of excitement about this conjunction, and a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing online is not quite right, because often what happens is people get a little bit of astrological information and then they take what they think they know from it and they run, and sometimes they run into a cliff that they don't know that they ran into, and all of a sudden they're falling through thin air, and there's a lot of people listening to that person and following them and not knowing it. This conjunction, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, occurs every 20 years. Because there are 4 elements, and because the conjunction cycle tends to follow that pattern of elements, and there are some periods where it doesn't quite, just like Saturn moved into Aquarius, and then moved back into Capricorn and is now moving into Aquarius, there's that same kind of a thing with this larger cycle. So if there are 4 elements and the cycle goes all the way around once in 800 years, that means it's roughly in the same element for 200 years, roughly. We are at the point at which the elemental shift has been confirmed. And when I say it's been confirmed, it's not that it's occurring now. It actually occurred in 1980. And a lot of people just forget this. They go, this is the first time it's been in air in 200 years. No, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Libra in 1980, around the same time as there was an approaching Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Libra. And that 1980, that didn't happen until I think 82-ish. But here's the thing, is that for roughly a century and a half prior to that, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction cycle was occurring in Earth signs. And in fact, I've actually, being the geek that I am, I ran a series of conjunctions here using Solar Fire, and I have a list of all the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions from 1501 up through present time, because I don't believe what other people say, and I wanted to actually do the calculations and understand what the nature of this cycle was. But the fact of the matter is that going back to Even 1930, there was a Jupiter-Saturn square, but the conjunction in 1942 was in Taurus, Earth sign. Going back prior to that, the previous conjunction in 1897 was actually left over from the cycle behind in water. But we have Taurus in 1942, and then we have Virgo in 1965, 66. That's actually was the opposition, the conjunction, where I'm missing the conjunction. There it is. No, I'm not getting it here. I'm missing a sheet of paper. The conjunction was in 1960. And then there was, for some reason, my sheet is not, I've lost the sheet on this. Maybe this is it. Anyhow, doesn't matter. In 1960, there was a conjunction in Earth. In 1980, the conjunction occurred in Libra. But in 2000, it was back in Taurus, back in Earth. So we've had this glimpse into air. And now with this conjunction, this kind of sets the tone where the next cycles will, in fact, be all in Earth for the next 150 years. Oh, I realized why my printout that I was so proud of isn't representing it. And this is a printout of Saturn-Uranus aspects. So much for that.
and you meant that it'll be conjunct in air signs for the next 200 years.
Yeah, and it's actually more like 160 years, because then it'll tip into fire, and then it'll tip back. No, then it'll tip into water, and then it'll tip back into air again. So yes, we are now, and in fact, even if the age of Aquarius doesn't begin for another 130, 40 years, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction cycle will still be occurring in air signs. So I'm not saying that this has no relevance to that. I'm just saying this isn't that.
Right.
However, it's very significant that when these, what are called mutations or great mutation to the grand conjunction cycle of Jupiter and Saturn, and we'll talk more about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction cycles when we talk about the Christmas star. Right now, I want to stay focused on this December. But the fact of the matter is that this is a huge deal. And people are saying it's a 1 in 800 year. Yeah, it's a 1 in 200 year. Well, it's really 1 in every other century or so. We have this tendency to take things that occur and make them like impossibly rare. You know, I mean, the Saturn Pluto conjunction that occurred back in January happens every 35 years or so, 35, 40 years. Now, there were people who were saying, well, yes, but it only happens in Capricorn about every 500 years. And that's true. It didn't happen until 500 years prior. But prior to that, it was only a couple hundred years before that. These cycles are funny. And so we have to be careful about saying this is the first time this has ever happened, or this hasn't happened, since the dawn of civilization. These events are all repeating, and they're repeating in different cycles, in different nuances, but together, no matter how you put these all together, 2020 will always, historically, will stand out as an extraordinary year, because there's been a confluence of so many different major cycles that have all been rare, relatively rare, or extremely rare unto themselves, that have all come into a stream. And you see, when we get these outer planet cycles, I almost think of it, I may have said this before, it's something that I've used this image before. Going back hundreds of millions of years ago, there were no mammals on land. There were fish in the ocean. And some fish probably ate some sort of seaweed that kind of made them a little smarter than their other friends. And these fish began jumping higher out of water. And at first it was like, holy crap, what the kerplunk, I'm back in water, you know? And then they began like maybe communicating telepathically to each other. Do you ever jump out of water? Do you have any idea what's up there? No, I wouldn't do that. That'll kill you, you know, until more and more of them are jumping out of water, until enough of them bravely are jumping out of water, some of them landing on land and dying, and over a long period of time, actually some of them rolling back into water and actually developing the ability to use oxygen rather than to rely on their gills to separate out the oxygen from the water, until eventually there they are on land. Now, to me, the outer planet conjunctions, I'm talking about the Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Eris, and I don't talk much about Eris, not because it's unimportant, but just because it's enough of another layer of confusing that people who are new into astrology go, oh my God, there's no end to it. And it's true, there's no end to it. But it's like during these periods of outer planet transformations, we're like fish jumping out of water going, holy kerplunk, and we're back in it. And we have things like the Roaring 20s or the psychedelic 60s, or major changes where we have street disruptions of Tahrir Square in Egypt, and the Arab Spring revolutions of people, and or the Chinese Cultural Revolution. We have these waves of expression and suppression, and then afterwards the fish kind of go back, and for a few generations it's like, I can't do that anymore, that's going to kill me. And so they kind of get it back together, and maybe it's their children or their children's children that live through another change, and they go, my grandpa told me about this, holy crap, yeah, we got to figure out a way where we can make use of, that's where we're at. We have had, you see, and when you have multiple glimpses in a row, which don't always occur. We had the Uranus-Pluto conjunction that created the 60s. We had the Saturn-Uranus-Neptune conjunctions that created these huge map redrawing changes of the late 80s, early 90s, the fall of communism, the fall of the wall in Berlin, these big changes with the Saturn-Uranus-Neptune conjunction. And then we had the Uranus-Pluto square of 2012 to 2015. That's the Arab Spring that I was talking about before, Occupy Everything, Ferguson, Missouri, all these events that kind of stir up imagination that are just greater than if that same event happened in an off year. It would have been awful, it would have been terrible. 30 people would have been arrested, 20 people would have been killed, and no one would have noticed. And I don't mean to be callous about it. It's just that sometimes events grab our imagination, and that 2012 to 2015 was a direct resonance back to the mid 60s, and people who lived through both know, and people who read history can see the connection between the widespread use and proliferation of personal drugs and the legalization of them, in the 2012 to 2015, the feminine second wave, third wave of feminism in the 1960s, and Ms. Magazine and all of that. And then the, proliferation and legalization of gay marriage and so on in the 2012 to 2015, the ecology, the power of the people, the revolution. I mean, there's just so many different issues that are resonant. And the point is that these happened within a lifetime, so that people like me actually experienced both of them. And when you experience a second or a third or a fourth, and then a 2020 on top of that, you begin to realize that these changes that were just glimpses of a Saturday night acid trip at a Grateful Dead concert in 1964, all of a sudden, the entire civilization has gone through this change. That's December. I mean, December is the punctuation mark. It's the exclamation point. It's not that there'll be any one event, although as we watch December unfolding, it's like I said somewhere else, I said, December does not disappoint. if we want to continue the craziness of the trajectory of 2020, December fits right in line. And we're not even to the most intense part of it yet. It will be around the eclipse, the solstice, the shift of first Saturn, then Jupiter, then the alignment of the two of them on the solstice itself, and then the Mars square Pluto on Christmas Eve. And then once we move into January, we have Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. And we have Mars finally moving out of its shadow that it's been in since May. And Mars moves out of its shadow into Taurus. And as it moves into Taurus, the first thing it does is it bumps into a square with Saturn, and then a square to Jupiter. And then it conjuncts Uranus. What day? Oh, Inauguration Day. We're not allowed, contractually, we're not allowed to talk about that until we get to the January forecast. but that's all part of December. I mean, astrologically, it won't be until Mars clears the squares to Saturn and Jupiter and its conjunction to Uranus that we really can look back and go, oh, so that was 2020. And it actually may take decades for us to really understand what the hell happened in 2020.
Wow. Okay. So what are the dates in January? I know we're not contractually going into January yet, but just what are those dates?
I may be hard pressed to pull them out of my, maybe not. Hold on. Talk about something. Ask for something else in the meantime. I'm looking.
Well, I think first of all, I have an easy question. Is the Jupiter...
Mars goes into Taurus on January 6th.
Okay, but that's not the end of it.
No, it's Inauguration Day when Mars actually squares Uranus. I think that's or conjuncts Uranus, and I'm still looking for that, and I will get that as we're continuing to talk.
Okay, this is an easy question you can multitask with. On December 21st, Jupiter,
Yes.
Saturn, is that a
Yes.
grand conjunction or a great conjunction? And is there a difference? I've seen both.
I've seen both also. The truth of the matter is that although I have no planets in Virgo, it was really important for me to figure out which one was right. And I'm not sure I could. It appears that Kepler called it a grand conjunction. Now, how do you translate a word from German into English, and is grand and great, the same word? And then there are people who are calling it a grand mutation of a great mutation of the grand conjunction cycle. I honestly don't know. And you have to understand these terms are all new enough that they're not like, no one has historically defined these like anyone has historically defined the sign of Aries. This is stuff that really has not come into existence until the last couple of centuries. And I've been referring to it. I've been referring to this cycle as the grand conjunction cycle for years because I believe that's what Kepler referred to it as. And then the change of elements is a mutation of the grand conjunction. People might have different terminology and they may not be wrong. So I don't know that I can answer that easily.
Okay, so my next question is, has the element that these grand conjunctions occurred in, has it had a really significant impact on life here on Earth? Like noticeable, significant, like the ages, or not as much?
Here I'm going to have to rely temporarily on anecdotal material because I have not personally done my own research, which I will prior to the event occurring. Because when we talk about the Christmas star, which many astrologers, myself included, agree that it was a mutation of the grand conjunction cycle, mutating into water, into the sign of Pisces in 7 BC. If that's the case, before we do that show on December 17th, I think you said, I will do the research, which I have not personally done. I'll tell you what I've read is I've read that when these mutations occur, that they're extra important. I quickly ran back a few. I have not personally validated that, so I can't necessarily agree or disagree.
Okay.
That's the multiple choice line. Neither agree nor disagree. I'll highlight that little square.
And to be continued.
Oh yes, and to be continued. Now, on the dates of this upcoming squares and conjunctions, what I can tell you is that Mars moves into Taurus on January 6th, 0 degrees of Taurus. By then, Saturn is at 2 degrees and Jupiter, which is just trucking along, Jupiter is at 4 degrees. What that means is that Mars actually makes the square first with Saturn on January 12th. It then makes the square with Jupiter. I'm unfolding this real time as we're talking, on January 21st.
Okay.
On January 20th, actually. And then it makes the conjunction with Uranus. And so we have Jupiter squaring Uranus at the same time. Jupiter squaring Uranus around January 18th, 19th. In that period of time, Jupiter is squaring Uranus with Mars coming in, squaring Jupiter and conjuncting Uranus. This is going to be hugely expressive. I don't know what that exactly means, but there will be stuff going down then.
That's literally right on my birthday. It's going to be very, very interesting birthday.
Happy birthday.
Wait, so would you say December doesn't disappoint? Would you say January also doesn't disappoint as like a continuation of
I think January is a continuation. I mean, to me, December is like the beginning of the end of 2020, and January is really the end of 2020.
Yeah.
Now, how that plays out at this point in time, I don't really know. And I haven't really drilled down deep enough in January. I'm picking out some of the major events. And it's like looking at someone's chart and seeing, oh my gosh, they have the moon conjunct Saturn. And you can do a reading with just knowing that, but you may not hit the nuances and you may not even hit the most important thing, depending upon how that conjunction is integrated into the rest. So it's not only that I'm contractually prohibited from talking about a month ahead, I'm also experientially limited.
Okay. All right. So the biggest things we have this month really are starting on December 14th with the eclipse.
Yeah.
You said it's setting up what's coming around the 21st. Would you say that the events or the things that are happening in people's lives right now between the first eclipse and the second eclipse on December 14th are the content that's playing out all month? Or, I mean, how does that work?
I think on a personal level, I would expect, normally if Uranus was a major player, and there is some Uranian energy here. I mean, the sun makes a trine with Uranus on December 27th. And there we have a bit of, we have a few days of Mercury on Christmas Eve making a trine with Uranus. Mercury and Capricorn making a trine with Uranus, and the sun making a trine with Uranus. And so there's some unexpected excitement that could be very cool. It could be with Uranus, you never know. But largely on a personal level, I'm not expecting a whole lot of unexpected stuff. What I'm expecting is a continuation and a building, a crescendo of what has been playing out and building all year, going all the way back to January and maybe even pre-January. And so, I think that this first eclipse kind of set it up. I as you know, I sometimes I have this affection for making up words and for naming things, and I've coined the word eclipsical. You will not find it anywhere in any dictionary, but the time in between two eclipses is infra-eclipsical.
Mm.
It's
It sounds like a popsicle flavor.
yeah, well, it's a popsicle that I would lick with caution. Now, when I say lick with caution, the ancients were way more fearful of eclipses than I think deserves. I mean, there are a lot of people who say don't even go out under an eclipse. I remember speaking at this conference, I've mentioned this before, in India, while there was a lunar eclipse occurring in the middle of my talk. And I would have been out watching it. I was prior to my talk. It was a half-hour talk. But at the moment of the eclipse, I broke and played some flute music for people to meditate. And afterwards, and it was like, and I said, God, if we weren't in here, I'd be out watching the eclipse. And, there were 1,000 Indian Vedic astrologers in that audience who went like, like, why would you go out under an eclipse? Eclipses are portals. They shift the polarity, and they can be rather disruptive. Remember, total eclipses, the old edict was, the king must die, long live the king. It's this change of power that has to do with what I call Nietzschean nihilism. That is, there are people who associate Nietzsche with Hitler and so on. That was a total misinterpretation. It was, what Nietzsche basically said, nihilism was the most important things, the things at the top of the mountain, the most important ideals and concepts eventually have to disintegrate and fall to the bottom of the mountain while new things come in. And so this idea of the eclipse is kind of nihilistic, in as much as the most important things that have worn out their welcome, that have overstayed their use. It can be Saturnian, meaning that what's useful stays, what isn't useful goes, but with a Uranian influence, and that is, it happens overnight, or it seems to happen rather suddenly. But people do agree that the effects of eclipses are not just the day or the week or even the month of the eclipse. They kind of open up these weird time portals that we can walk into and through months before the eclipse or months after the eclipse. And so the fact that this particular eclipse is tied so closely to this transition of Capricorn to Aquarius energy, I think is important, but I don't necessarily think it's about a specific individual event personally or culturally. I think it's about the the lingering unresolved energies that might move toward some sense of at least temporary resolution, but I don't think the resolution is long lasting. Again, with a Saturn Uranus square all of next year, the conflict is definitely, in my mind, between the old and the new, between the status quo and the revolution. And when I say revolution, I don't mean physical, I don't mean guns, I mean a revolution in thinking, a new way of looking at the structures, a systemic overhaul, if you will. And there are many people who would say, well, that's because of the United States' Pluto return. I go, okay. And there are many people who would say, well, that's because we're entering the age of Aquarius. And there I go, I pass.
Okay, so the biggest events, we have December 14th eclipse. We have December 16th, Saturn moving into Aquarius. Jupiter catching up with Saturn very quickly after that and moving into Aquarius on December 19th.
And then catching up on the 21st.
To each other, right? Catching up to each other at the solstice, December 21st. And then Mars square Pluto on December Eve, the new holiday. Mars square Pluto. And then we have the 27th, the Sun trine Uranus, right?
Yes.
January, and then moving into January, we have all this Mars action. Mars moving into Taurus on January 6th.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Mars square Saturn on January 12th. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Say that again. I'm sorry for
Well,
interrupting.
Mars square Saturn on January 12th, Mars square Jupiter on January 20th, and Jupiter square Uranus between January 18 and 19. So these are all these big crescendo.
And the Mars conjunct Uranus itself on the 22nd, 21st. On the 20th, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Mars square Jupiter, right?
Yes, but Mars also conjunct Uranus.
Oh, okay.
And incidentally, on the 20th, on the exact, pretty close, like within a half an hour of the exact Mars-Uranus conjunction in Taurus, the moon moves into Taurus, which means that 12 hours later, the moon will be conjuncting the Mars-Uranus conjunction squaring Jupiter. Kapow. This is a big one. I just wanted to mention one thing that we didn't talk about, and I'm not sure I want to dig down into a whole lot right now, but that is because we got so sidetracked with the eclipses, which are certainly significant and important. We kind of glossed over the Cancer full moon on December 29th in the evening. And that's at about 8 degrees of Cancer. It's squaring Chiron. Chiron is also a player this month. There's a lot of potential for healing, but we have to go at, it's almost like the eclipse opens the door. We have to walk through the door, through the portal, in order to reach out and acknowledge other people's points of view, which can be just as painful regardless of which side of any issue you're on, but acknowledging them so that there can be the potential for healing. Because if we don't figure out a way to heal some of this rift, we're in trouble regardless of who wins any election, regardless of what policies, are in play or not.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I have a question for you. This is also the close of Saturn and Capricorn that we've been in essentially for 3 years.
Correct. December of 2017.
Right. So would you say that also, I mean, I know we're moving into Aquarius, but does it have a significance that we're closing something here?
Well, yeah, I've actually given this quite a bit of thought because Saturn has been in Capricorn for almost 3 years, 3 years, and Jupiter has been in Capricorn for a year. But they're both moving into Aquarius, which is encouraging us to look ahead rather than behind. However, they're leaving Pluto for another 4 years. And so anyone who thinks that this Capricorn dance is done, Pluto has another 4 years. It's actually during the next presidential election that Pluto is thinking about moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. And the interesting thing about that move, or let me say about the 4 years in between, is the fact that Pluto still has the job to do that he began when he moved into Capricorn, and that is Roto-Rooter, basically coming in and cleaning out the pipes. You want to talk about draining a swamp? Well, I'm talking about this without any political overtones, because it's not only institutional swamps, whether it's institutional corruption, graft, sex trade, whether it's institutional cronyism, whether it's physical bodily gunk and garbage that's in our physical bodies. Basically, Pluto's coming in to clean the shit out. And Pluto's been doing that. And with Saturn and Jupiter there for a year, there's been a real focus on the hard work that needs to be done. And in some ways, Saturn has held back the process of change, because that's what Saturn does. It enforces it, but it makes it go slowly. And so as these planets leave Pluto until Pluto moves into Aquarius, the end of 2024, which is a presidential election year, that is basically, that'll be the time when Pluto has finally said these changes that have needed to happen institutionally, structurally, corporately, governmentally, changes of the decay of capitalism, our banking systems, our roads, our bridges, wherever you want to go with it. When Pluto moves into Aquarius, that work will be done. But until that, even though Saturn and Jupiter are moving ahead, they're leaving it in good hands, because Pluto ain't going to leave anything undone that is undone.
Wow.
In other words, we're not getting out of this prematurely.
Right. Well, that's probably good.
And what's also interesting is that in that same year, in 2025, not only does Pluto move into Aquarius, but Neptune moves into Aries. So we're getting, by 2025, this is a different country. I mean, okay, it may be a different country than it was a year ago. I'm not, or I don't mean just even the United States, I mean around the world. But the change of 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 Neptune and Pluto shifting signs in 2025, 2024, 2025, Pluto into Aquarius, and Neptune into Aries. And right behind it, Uranus comes screaming into Gemini, by 2026. Actually, even, summer of 2025, Uranus is tipped into Gemini. So all of a sudden, think about this. We have Uranus in Gemini, Saturn and Neptune conjunct in Aries, and Pluto in Aquarius making trines and sextiles with each other. That's a completely different flavor than what we've had now.
Wow. All right. Well, it sounds like we're all going to be hanging out for a while. Got a few more years, huh?
Well, it also sounds like for those of us who make it through 2025, we have some pretty magical times coming up.
Mm.
And that may have made these difficult, stressful times worth it.
Mm. Okay, so we have, for the month, in summary, this is a big opportunity for healing. This eclipse portal has opened up a doorway. We have to walk through it and be willing to go into it. But when we do, there is a potential for healing. And a lot of that is acknowledging different points of view, acknowledging different experiences, different ways of seeing things, different ways of perceiving what's happening, all these different things, acknowledging different perspectives. We have a crescendo of energy on this year. We have also, you called it the grand finale. So, and it sounds like it's moving into January, but this crescendo energy, we are probably going to see some inkling of a temporary resolution. You used the word temporary because the next year indicates that nothing's really over.
Yeah, I think what happens is that we can have symptomatic suppression.
Yeah.
It's like going to a doctor and getting a drug to make the horrific symptom go away, but you still got something on a systemic level that's not going away yet.
Right. Okay. So Band-Aids potentially.
Band-Aid.
Okay. All right. And that next year we are moving into this conflict between old and new, which is going to kind of hit several times throughout the year and will be one of the major themes for 2021.
Yeah.
Any words of wisdom for all of us as we're going into this crescendo final act of 2020?
Keep breathing. Okay. Now, I say that it sounded tongue in cheek, but I mean keep breathing. And I don't mean that from a standpoint of just survive. I mean that that deep, long, strong breathing, whether you get that from working out, from pranayama, from fire breathing, kundalini yoga, great sex. I don't care where you get it from, but it's the breath that basically keeps us present. And I think that being present is important, but it's the ticket. Once we're in the show, in other words, breathing keeps it going. And again, I don't mean I mean real breathing. Breathing is the ticket in. And once we're in, then the practice is compassion. The practice is kindness. I love the fact that the Dalai Lama once said, when asked, what is your religion? He said, my religion is kindness.
I love that. Wow. There's a great book called Breath by James Nestor, all about breath and the power of it and how we've gone so far away from it and how that's really at the root of so many of the struggles and that we have physically, mentally, emotionally. So that's maybe it would be a good book to either listen to or read to keep you in, to remind you throughout this month to continue to breathing, the importance of that. Rick, you're awesome. Thank you so much. So like we said, we're going to actually not have the Cosmic Connection next week because we have the 2021 forecast.
Well, wait a second. I'm going to have a cosmic connection because I always have a cosmic connection.
Of course
I'm just going to do it without anyone watching, without you.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll be having one together. You're welcome to join us as well. It's astrologyhub.com/2021. That'll be the 2021 forecast event featuring 12 astrologers who are actually going to be our inner circle astrologers for the year ahead. So you can sign up for that. That's going to be at this same time slot on Thursday. In addition to that, we have been meeting and planning Astrology Foundations Level 2.
Oh, yes.
Yes, which is coming your way in February of 2021. We'll be talking more about that starting in January. So stay tuned for that. And I think that's it for now.
I think so too.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We missed you last week. I don't know about you, Rick, but it seemed like forever between this week and the one before.
I actually got a few emails from people in, Portugal, Belgium, Australia saying, are you okay? There was no, and they just didn't dawn on them that we Americans have this peculiarity that we take that day off.
Right, exactly. So we missed you as well. And I hope that you'll all join us next week. And then we'll be back for December 17th, where we're going to be, Rick's been queuing it up. We're going to be talking about the Christmas star and the grand conjunction and the birth of Jesus and the Christmas story and all of that. So that'll be December 17th. So make sure you tune in for that. In the meantime, thank you for being a part of our community. And thank you as always for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode.